Okay, welcome everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. Again, my name is Tunde. I am a program manager in grants here at the Regional Arts Commission. Thank you so much for joining me today to talk a little bit about the Artist Fellowship. Just to give you a little bit of a rundown on how we're going to do things today. So I have quite a bit of information that I'd like to share with you. But I do have some spaces placed in this presentation for questions. So I will ask that if you have any questions that you, unless you're on a phone, I can see that some folks are joining us from a phone line, that you, if you're on a computer or someplace where you can type your question in, that you use the chat box at any point when you think of it. And then when we get to the spaces that I've created for questions, I'll address any questions that are there. And I'll also pause for a minute and unmute the folks that are joining us from the phone. All right, so let's go ahead and get it started. So welcome. I am with the Regional Arts Commission. I'm going to start off by telling you just like a minute of information about RAC. So we are at the forefront of efforts to transform St. Louis into a more vibrant, creative, and economically thriving community. This that we're looking at is our mission statement. By elevating the vitality, value, and visibility of the arts. We do that through a few different methods. Some of them are partnerships, some of them are programs, but the bulk of the way that we do this work is through our grant making. We have 4 major grants. They are the General Operating Support, Program Support, the Artist Fellowship, and Artist Support Grant. General Operating Support are our larger grants to our large arts-focused organizations. Those are going to be like the Symphony, the Rep, etc. And then our program support are smaller grants up to $15,000 for either smaller arts-based organizations or non-arts-based organizations who are doing arts programming. So that could be like a social service agency that has arts programming. It could be like smaller theater companies, etc. The general operating support is 2-year and program support is 1 year, and that's all we're going to spend on that. And then we have the Artist Fellowship, which those are our larger grants. It's an annual process, and those are the $20,000 awards to individual artists. I'll tell you just like a little more about that towards the end of this presentation. But what we're here today to talk about, and then the Artist Support Grant. I've been giving a lot of these presentations recently. And the Artist Support Grant, which is our smaller grant, they are up to $3,000 and they're for an artist project, opportunity, or need. Fun fact, the Artist Support Grant is open right now. The deadline's actually today. So if any of you are working on that, we do have a presentation from the Artist Support Grant, and that is currently online. What we're here today to talk about is the Artist Fellowship. Before we get there, just a little bit more about RAC. So we were founded in 1985 by the city and the county of St. Louis. Our funding comes from the city and the county through the hotel motel tax. So whenever you have folks that come in that stay in a hotel, motel, or Airbnb, we get a percentage of the tax that they pay. We actually split a percentage with the Visitors Bureau or the or Explore St. Louis, and that is where we get our funding to fund the arts. Because of that, that does mean that our funding pool is going to be in the city and county. So that's one of the major eligibility items for our artists, is that they be living in St. Louis City or St. Louis County. So here is a bit about the Artist Fellowship. The purpose is to foster and invest in the careers of St. Louis artists of all disciplines, and I'll talk more about what all disciplines looks like, by providing funds to allow for more time and space to study, reflect, experiment, explore, practice, and create. It's to advance the individual artist's creative journey, and then to recognize artistic excellence and honor the work of seasoned artists, advance the work of mid-career artists, and nurture the work of developing artists. So basically what we're saying on this slide is that The Artist Fellowship is really for artists to take whatever it is they need in order to advance their careers. And it also is available to artists at any stage of their career. We do have a few updates. These updates actually were implemented late last year. However, I wanted to keep them in this presentation since it's fairly new. So we do have a new website. It's grants.rscstl.org. If any of you used our previous application process, you will probably find this a breath of fresh air. We have two policy changes. The first is that the reapplication period has been established as 10 years. We didn't previously have a reapplication period, so it was kind of up in the air, but I think initially there was not the plan that people would apply again for the Artist Fellowship. And then the second is that applicants must be in good standing with RAC with no delinquent reports or required grant documentation. And that just means if you've received an artist support grant, then you've turned in all of your stuff. And then finally, we have a new review criteria. This is not, it is technically new, but really this is a clarification. This criteria is how has the artist's work or practice contributed to the vibrancy and advancement of the St. Louis region. And the reason why I say it's really a clarification is because this is a conversation that was already happening around our review table. Reviewers were having discussions about the artists who made it into the second round of review and figuring out the way in which they continue the work that RAC is doing for the region. So this really was an opportunity. By making it an actual criteria and by making it a question, it's an opportunity for applicants to address it directly. So here is a little bit more about the fellowship itself. It's an award of $20,000, as I mentioned before, to 10 individual artists in any discipline. That said, we do have 9 disciplines listed. They are architecture, craft and traditional arts, dance, design, literature, media arts, music, theater arts, and visual arts. We list these 9 and with the goal of touching any person who is a creative practitioner, but we recognize that there are many artists who classify themselves or identify as multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary. There are artists working in social practice for who these disciplines are a little bit tricky. And there are artists who are working in fields like, say, opera, where the question is it music or is it theater, or who are working in types of performative dance that could be considered dance or theater, etc. The purpose of the disciplines is not to box you in to say like, this is the type of artist that I am and this is only what I do. The purpose is so that you, the applicant, can assist us in selecting the people that you want looking at your application. So we have these folks called discipline readers, and I'm going to spend a lot more time on this later in the presentation. But discipline readers are people who have experience in the discipline in which you've applied. So if you say that you are a craft and traditional artist, then the people that are looking at your application are going to be in that discipline. Okay, so a little bit about the eligibility. We're going to breeze through this. This is also on our website and in the guide. So some of these slides we won't spend a ton of time on because I really want to get to the nuance of what the review criteria are and what makes a strong application. But definitely, if you have any questions, type them into the chat box. Any artist must be 25 years or older, not enrolled as a full-time undergraduate or graduate student, with no plans to enroll in the next 15 months, must be a current resident of St. Louis City or County and have been for at least 1 year, must have created and presented their own original works to or performed for the public in the past 3 years, must not have received an Artist Fellowship in the past 10 years. We have been running the Artist Fellowship for 6 years now, so that's everyone who's received one. And then finally, must be in good standing with RAC with no delinquent reports or required grant documentation. And then here are restrictions. So any non-current artist support grant must be completed. This is just referring to previous grantees. This will not apply to most of you. Artists who are granted the Artist Fellowship must remain residents of St. Louis for the duration of the Artist Fellowship period. And the reason for that is, well, one, when you are awarded an Artist Fellowship, you have what's known as the fellowship year. During that time, we are celebrating you, we are meeting with you, we are finding out ways that we can support you, and also working to connect you with the other artist fellows who have also been awarded. So it is both an award as well as an experience. Artists who are granted an Artist Fellowship must wait 1 full calendar year after the fellowship period has ended to apply for the Artist Support Grant. So those are those smaller project grants that I mentioned earlier. Artists may apply for and receive an Artist Fellowship every 10 years, not to exceed 3 Lifetime Artist Fellowship Awards. So with this, we are saying we are committed to supporting the artists of St. Louis and also to helping to keep amazing artists here in St. Louis. So there's the potential of receiving an Artist Fellowship up to 3 times. And then finally, organizations are ineligible to apply. So here are just some key dates in the schedule. Later in the presentation, I have some like the full dates, but we know the application's open. It closes in 2 weeks on Thursday, September 12th. It closes at 11:59 p.m. on that day, but let's pretend that it closes at 5, and don't work yourself until that time. The notification of the first round status is going to go out on Friday, October 25th. So that we typically get between 150 and 200 applications for the Artist Fellowship. I'm going to explain the entire process on the very next slide, but that first round, you'll all hear back on that date. The award notifications are going to go out to all of the second round applicants on Friday, December 13th. And I put via email here because it's very important. If you haven't created your account yet, please make sure that you're creating an account using an email address that you check and not a spam email. All the notifications are going out to the email address which you provided when you applied. So when you apply, you should get a confirmation that your application has gone through in your inbox. And if you don't get that, that's the first sign that something may be happening with your email address. You should definitely reach out to make sure we have a nice, strong email address on file for you so that you receive your notification. If you are awarded an Artist Fellowship, your fellowship year is going to start on January 1st of 2020. It's going to run through to the end of the year. And you all will be publicly announced on January, typically late January of 2020. Before we move on, are there any questions about anything that I've mentioned so far? So eligibility restrictions. Can you be applying?
You are muted.
Are you saying that you are a graduate student and you are applying to fund that? Okay, Jennifer, if you could clarify your question a little bit. In the meantime, Stacy, so I received an artist support grant last round and it's not due till the spring. You do not have to have your information uploaded before you apply for the Artist Fellowship. If you are still in your grant year, then you are in good standing. Yeah. So Jennifer, I'm not quite sure about the question. Oh, I see. Yes, that is okay. So really it is about full-time graduate students, because we recognize that everyone could use support, all artists could use support, but that students, artists who are students and pursuing a full-time degree typically have a lot of resources from their university or their school. So as a part-time student, you typically don't have the same access to the resources like a full studio space, etc., as they might. So you would still be eligible. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and move on. So here's a quick overview of the application review process. The first thing that happens is once the Artist Fellowships, all the applications have come in, staff, that's me, reviews all applications for eligibility. And this is base level eligibility. So what I'm looking at is confirmation that the address that you've listed is in St. Louis City or County, that no one who is like not the right age has flipped through, that it's not readily apparent that you are a full-time student in some way. And then finally, that if you are a previous grantee, that you are in good standing. Once all of that has gone through, then all of the eligible applications are going to be moved on to discipline readers. Our discipline readers read and rate the applications using 5 review criteria, and we're going to spend some time on the criteria later in this presentation. And then the top rated applications from each discipline will move to the next stage of review. There's typically between 25 and 35, and I did want to let you all know that there is no quota. We don't say, well, this is the year that we're going to have this many dancers and this many writers. There is a formula that we use, and it's based on the applications that come in. So we may have, of the 150 to 200 applications, if a third of them are visual, it is likely that a few more visual applications are moving on than the other disciplines, just based on the makeup of everyone who applied. So once those 25 to 35 are selected, they move on to the citizen review panel. The citizen review panel is a separate group, and they will talk about them in 2 slides. And they review the top rated applications regardless of discipline. So the citizen review panel is not made up of based on discipline, and they will recommend 10 applicants. Once the citizen review panel has selected their 10 applicants, those applicants are going on to the grants committee. A little bit about the grants committee. So as I mentioned, RAC was founded by the city and the county. We have a board, just like most operating organizations, and our board consists of 15 people who are appointed, they're political appointments by the mayor as well as the county executive. So half of them come to us from the city, half from the county, and they oversee all of the work that we do here at RAC. The grants committee is a smaller group from within the commission that specifically focuses on the work that we do in the grants department. So they look at all of our grant making processes, from general operating support to the artist support grants. So once the 10 are selected by the citizen review panel, they'll go on to the grants committee, who will look at the recommendations as well as the entire process that we've gone through, ask any questions that they have, and then ultimately will confirm 10 artists to go on to the commission. Once the full commission votes on it and approves it, that's when we actually have 10 Artist Fellowship recipients. So Discipline readers. Who are these people that are reading and rating your application? Again, once the applications are reviewed and I've confirmed the eligibility, they're read by discipline readers. Every single application is going to be read by 2 discipline readers. And they are going to be, again, people with experience in the discipline that you selected on your application. The discipline readers will always be members of the St. Louis arts community and may be members of the national arts community. So what I'm saying is that of the 2, one of them will always be a member of the St. Louis arts community. We recognize that, especially with the Artist Fellowship, the work that you are doing could be very tied to the community here. And so it's important that one of the discipline readers at least have a strong connection with or understanding of the way that things work in St. Louis. The second discipline reader may also be a member of the St. Louis arts community, but could be a member of the national arts community, because at this stage they are really focusing on the work. And so not just the work, but your career. And so we recognize that experts outside of St. Louis have a lot to say as well, and can lend valuable insight to this process and to an application. So again, once the discipline readers have all read the applications and rated them, a top rated goes on to the citizen review panel. Our citizen review panel is a 7-person panel, and it's made up of 4 St. Louis arts and culture and community experts and 3 RAC commissioners. So 3 of the people from our board that I mentioned earlier, and then those arts and culture and community experts, they could be a politician who is very invested in the arts. They could be an art instructor. They could be a curator or someone who represents one of the major arts institutions. So they're going to be people with a large and broad understanding of the arts and or of the St. Louis community. And then I also want to mention that they could be you. Not if you're applying, of course, but your discipline readers and even one of your citizen review panelists could be a practitioner, someone who has a lot of experience in the field doing the work themselves. We always have one previous artist fellow on the panel, but we also have had working artists on the panel as well. If you're interested in becoming a discipline reader, it would likely be for the Artist Support Grant, but you could also serve on the citizen review panel for one of our organizations, or if you're interested in nominating someone to do this work, you can find more information about it on our website under Explore Grants. So the same way that you get to the application, and then you would click on citizen review panels and discipline readers. This is also a great opportunity to see what we're saying to the folks who are reading and rating your applications. Okay. Before we move on, are there any questions about discipline readers, citizen panels, the process?
You are
I am going to go ahead and unmute the phones.
You are unmuted.
Any questions?
You are
What was that?
You are unmuted. You are muted.
Okay, so we're going to go ahead and move on. I don't see any questions in the chat either. So now we're going to talk about the application itself. So this is the application outline that I've had up here for a minute. So hopefully you've been able to take a look. For those of you on the phones, the application consists of basic information, which is just like your name, just some basic information about yourself. The Artist Fellowship narrative questions, and these are the 2 tasks that will ask you 3 strategic questions about you. I'm going to talk about those on the next 2 slides. But this is basically an opportunity for the readers to get to know you. Demographic information. This is information that helps REC learn more about who we serve, but it is absolutely not a part of your application. This is only visible to staff internally, and staff does not read or rate or have anything to do with the selection of the applicants. And then a detailed resume or CV. And then finally, documentation of your work. And we're going to spend quite a bit of time on the narrative questions as well as on documentation, because those are the 2 most important parts of the application. One more thing about demographics. So this basically helps us make sure that we're speaking to enough of people that represent St. Louis. So if we see that our applicants we're missing applicants in a certain area, we might take our workshops there. Or if we see that there's other types of applicants that we're not meeting, we might look at other organizations and see how we can partner with them to get the information about our application out. So these are the narrative questions. The first narrative part 1 is reviewed at all stages, meaning both your discipline readers and your citizen review panelists are going to be seeing your responses. And the questions are, 1, please provide an artist statement. And 2, please provide a description of how receiving an artist fellowship would benefit you creatively and professionally as an artist at this time in your career. The second part, narrative part 2, is only reviewed by the citizen review panel, and your discipline readers do not see it. And this question is, please detail the ways in which your work or practice contributes to the vibrancy and advancement of the St. Louis region. The reason for this is the first part of the narrative, so your artist statement and how the artist fellowship will affect your career, is something that any of the discipline readers would be able to assess you on. Because again, the discipline readers could be both local and national. That second question, please detail the ways in which your work or practice contributes to the vibrancy and advancement of the St. Louis region, is really going to be something that should be assessed by someone with roots in this area. And so that is for the citizen review panel, who is all here in St. Louis, but also has really strong understandings of the creative ecosystem here in St. Louis. And then here are the review criteria. They are artistic excellence, benefit of the artist fellowship to your artistic practice, income as a working or teaching artist, history of creating art and presenting it to the public, artistic education, and St. Louis community impact. Those first 5 that I mentioned, so from artistic excellence to artistic education, those are how you are being rated by the discipline readers. However, that last one, St. Louis community impact, again, is not being reviewed by the discipline readers. It's only being reviewed by the citizen review panelists. And then the citizen review panelists are only looking at 3 criteria. They're looking at artistic excellence, the benefit of the artist fellowship to your artistic practice, and then your St. Louis community impact. They are not looking at your income as a working or teaching artist, at your history of creating art and presenting it to the public, or at your artistic education. The understanding is that the discipline readers have done the work of really vetting the applicants and investigating and ensuring that you are a strong applicant. And if you have made it to that 25 to 35 in the second round, then the citizen review panelists can just do the work of focusing on what will make a strong cohort of 10 artists to represent St. Louis for the year. So what I've done on the next few slides is I have taken each criteria that I feel could benefit from a little bit more elaboration or explanation, and I have talked about it, but also listed places in your application where it would be good to speak to that. So the first one is artistic excellence. This is going to show up in your artist statement. It's going to show up in your support materials. And the goal is that those materials demonstrate creative accomplishment and excellent work. Your artist statement, documentation of your work, which could be your work samples or a website. One note about this, your website cannot be the only documentation of your work. At least once per round, I get a call from a discipline reader, or I discover it myself that an artist's website is down. If you submit a website that goes down, or there's some issue and the discipline readers are not able to see your work, that is a part of your application process. We don't do work to fix that. However, if you've submitted work samples through our website, through the grants site, if your images are not showing up, there is an issue with the system and no one's images are showing up. If your links are broken or not working, no one's links are working. So we are aware of that and we are fixing it immediately. So this is a part of kind of quality control, but really so that we can help you and so that we can ensure that your materials are seen. Documentation of your work, and then finally your resume or CV. And your resume or CV may list awards, accolades, or other recognitions that point to artistic excellence. Next is the benefit of the Artist Fellowship to your artistic practice. So this is going to be where you're talking about how the Artist Fellowship will benefit and advance you creatively and professionally. This could show up in your narrative and could also show up in your resume. If there's like a clear trajectory in your resume, it's possible that the things you describe wanting to do or the things that you talk about in your narrative will be reflective of that. Your income as a working or teaching artist. Here is what that does not mean. It does not mean you are submitting 1099s or W-2s or anything like that, invoices, etc. We are not actually interested in kind of scrutinizing the way that you fund yourself or the things that you charge or any of that. We don't want to know about your money. What this means is that you have a history of deriving income from your skills as a working or teaching artist. This is typically going to show up in your resume. It could also show up in your narrative. It's going to be, I have done this residency. I taught this workshop. I have this commission. I have this this album that I'm trying to sell. That sort of thing. It, again, is not you listing out the work that you do. History of creating art and presenting it to the public. So this criteria is important. It's showing your history of active engagement in creating artwork and presenting it. You also could be an artist who does not create artwork. What I'm talking about are dancers and actors and artists who the work that you all do is the presentation of other people's work. of the choreographers, of the playwrights, etc. So it's either or, a history of creating the artwork and or a history of presenting it to the public. But there does have to be some public aspect, because that is you saying that you're not just creating the work for yourself or not doing this as a hobby. Same thing with the last one about deriving your income from this, because these really are awards for full-time professional artists. So this will show up in the documentation of your work, such as your work samples and your website. This may show up in your narrative, and it definitely should show up in your resume or CV. Your artistic education. So this is that you have and you document education or training, formal or informal. So one of the easiest is that you have some degree. But then you could also be a person who has apprenticed with a master artist. You could be someone who has been self-taught but has taken a lot of workshops over time. You could be someone who's been practicing for a very long time and honing your skill. So this is about the pursuit of improving your craft. This could show up in your narrative, and this could also show up in your resume. And then finally, St. Louis community impact. So the criteria question is, how has the artist's work or practice contributed to the vibrancy and advancement of the St. Louis region? And these are things to think about. 1, what impact have you as an artist had on the St. Louis community? And 2, if awarded an artist fellowship, how will it affect your impact? These are the 2 of the kind of questions that you can answer in your narrative that will help with addressing this criteria. So before we move on, are there any questions about any of the criteria that I've mentioned?
You are unmuted. You are muted.
Okay, I've received a question of, can I repeat which part of the application the national folks will review? Absolutely. They're going to review the first 2 questions. They're going to review the first 2 narrative questions, which are your artist statement and then a description of how the artist fellowship will impact your career. They will not review that 3rd question, which talks about your impact on the St. Louis community. They will also review all of your documentation and every other part of the application. Can you give an example of documentation that is not a website? Certainly, a video, an MP3, images that you upload. So we're actually going to talk about documentation in a few slides, so I think I'm going to hold for that. But basically, you are uploading information to the website. And then if you are a generative artist and an interpretive artist, does one or the other need to be highlighted more? In other words, is there a preference? No, there's definitely not a preference. You really just want to talk about the scope of your career. Okay, so on these next few slides, we're going to talk about what makes a strong proposal. So I have these 3 points here that I think make a nice, strong proposal. And then on the slides following, I'm going to break down each of these points. So here's what I have found to be consistent among our grantees: that their narrative contains a clear and succinct description of their practice, communication of their career goals, and communication about their goals for St. Louis and the ways that they're reflected in their practice or work. That there's strong, clear, and relevant documentation, and that they don't make assumptions about the reader's knowledge of their specific niche, that they take a moment to explain their artistic practice. So for the first one, narrative, what you want to provide is a clear description of your practice and career goals, a solid artist statement. For your artist statement, I know that for those of us who experienced the early part of our careers in academia, there's a very specific way that people want to see artist statements. Note that may not be the strongest when dealing with other practitioners who have been out in the world for a while, or when dealing with non-traditional gallery curators. So there are some great resources out there about what a strong artist statement looks like. I would recommend looking into that. Next is clearly detail the ways in which your work or practice contributes to the vibrancy and advancement of the St. Louis region. Explain issues that are being addressed, even if they seem obvious, especially if you do work that impacts the community, that you're including in your artist statement, or you're including in that question about how the Artist Fellowship will impact you, because remember that some of your discipline readers could be national. Clearly describe the way that receiving an Artist Fellowship would benefit you creatively and professionally as an artist at this time in your career. Next is documentation. So I actually have 2 slides for documentation. I apologize, the second slide is not going to be quite easy for those of you on the phone, but I'll describe it. So for this first one, documentation is space in the application for you to upload or link to various types of image, video, audio, and document files like Word docs, PDFs, etc. There's a full list available both in the application tutorial, which is on our website, and in the individual artist grants guide, which is also on our website. Both of these resources, as well as this slide deck actually, can be found on the How to Apply section of the Artist Fellowship page. So for documentation, you want strong, clear, and relevant documentation. What I mean by strong and clear is high quality files. So images that are, you know, if you're a photographer and the nature of your work is that it's soft, of course that's fine, but images that are crisp, video and sound that are clear and distinguishable. One note about high quality files, I'm doing air quotes that none of you can see. The files are all going to be viewed online, so your images do not have to be print quality. You don't need to upload things that are 300 dpi. One great thing about the system is once you upload any of your documentation, if you click on it, whatever you see, whatever you hear, is exactly what your discipline readers are going to see and hear. Once it's in the system, the way it looks to you is the way it will look to anyone else who is looking at it. Next is that you self-edit. So put your best foot forward. Here are some questions that I think help with doing that. 1, can readers understand what they're seeing, hearing, watching, reading without too much explanation? 2, will they have questions? Because remember that you will not be there to answer those questions. And then 3, is each file revealing new information? In considering those 3 things, typically that is the best that you can do in terms of self-editing your work. I also like to mention that self-editing could also mean making sure that you are submitting a reasonable amount of material. So for my writers out there, it is not likely that a discipline reader is going to be able to read your full-length novel. And for my media folks out there, it's not likely that a discipline reader is going to be able to watch your feature-length film. So if you're cool with them just diving into the work at any point and you feel like all of it should speak to them in the way you'd like it to, that's great. Feel free to submit the whole thing. But I highly recommend curating that. So taking and I won't throw out a number, but taking an excerpt of pages from your novel, or taking an excerpt of, or a clip from your film, etc., so that you really are in control of what they're seeing and the way that they're experiencing your application. And then finally, if for my visual artists or anyone who is submitting images, we do recommend / request that you group your images into PDFs. This is less, it's definitely not a requirement, and it's less about building an application that is strong and more about making sure that everything gets seen. So one of the few drawbacks of our system is that anything that you submit is going to show up in a drop-down menu. And so if you're submitting dozens of images, or just like more than a handful of images, that's going to be in a drop-down menu, which could be easy to miss. So I would recommend grouping them. You don't have to have all of your images in one PDF. You could have a few PDFs if there are bodies of work that make more sense together, but do consider that. And also, I don't mean put all your images on one page. I mean like a PDF that's like one page per image. So here is an example of two images that tell two different stories about the same work. And it's not the strongest example. It's not meant to be, it's not like a painting from far away and then a detail. It's more nuanced because often the questions that I get from all of you are a little bit more nuanced. So the image that we're looking at is of Anish Kapoor's Cloud Gate. It was built in 2006, and it is made of stainless steel, and it is in Chicago. In this case, I have named the file cloudgate-2006-stainless steel. Files that are named with the artwork's title, date, and materials provide a much clearer snapshot of your career and practice than those without this information, especially if you have work in galleries and the exhibitions are recent. One of the requirements is that you have shown work in the past 3 years. So if you have work that you are submitting that's documentation and you're including the year there and it was recent, you're already speaking to that requirement. So here is a gorgeous image of the bean, which is what a lot of people call it, against the Chicago skyline, showing the way that it intersects with the skyline. And then here is an image of it from a different angle on a different day. It's not quite as pretty, but it does show the way that this public artwork draws people to this location. So these two images, while they are not, they're not entirely different, they are telling two different and relevant stories about this public artwork. So there's an example of a way that you might want to consider. You don't need to have multiple images of the same piece if it doesn't make sense for you, but make sure that you're telling the full story about your work. And then finally, the last of the three things that make a strong proposal is don't make assumptions. So again, don't assume that the discipline readers and citizen review panelists have knowledge of your specific niche. Now, why would you say that, Tunde? You earlier said that they're going to be experienced in our disciplines. Yes, absolutely they will. But if you are a writer, your discipline readers could be a publisher, they could be a poet, and you're a fiction writer writing historical novels. They could be, anyone who has experience in your discipline, but doesn't necessarily have to be within your specific niche. If you're a dancer, your discipline reader could be a choreographer. They could be a retired ballet instructor, and you are a break dancer, or you are doing Horton technique in modern. you want to talk about the thing that makes your practice and your work unique, and spend a little bit of time explaining it to them, not as if they have no knowledge of your field, but as if they do need an introduction to the specific thing that you're doing. So the first thing is spend time introducing your work to the readers. Utilize as many of the 5 W's and H's necessary. So that's who, what, when, where, why, and how. One point about who, why is that question there? If you are submitting documentation and your work is ensemble work, you are a dancer in a company, you are an actor, you're a stage actor, you are a musician in a band, or you have your own band, please identify yourself in the video, in the photograph, etc. if there's a group of people, because your discipline readers and your citizen review panelists will want to find you. Then you're going to clearly connect your goals to your artistic practice or career, as I've said many times. And then finally, if your work addresses a specific St. Louis issue, succinctly explain this issue to the reader. Okay, are there any questions about any of those things that I've said? The things that make a strong proposal? I'm gonna unmute my phone, folks, and I think I've figured out a way to make this seamless.
You are unmuted. You are muted.
Okay, not seeing anything there. Anything in the chat? Okay, we'll go ahead and move on. So we are in the home stretch now. The rest of this is just some basic information, and then I will open it up for more specific or general questions. So earlier in this presentation, far earlier in this presentation, I gave you the key dates, and now we're going to go through all of the dates just so you can see what's happening during those times when we might go kind of quiet. So the application, by the way, this process from start to finish is about a 6-month process. The application opened on Monday, July 15th. It has been open for some time. It is closing again in 2 weeks on Thursday, September 12th at 11:59 p.m. It is not closing at midnight. If you are waiting that long, the application will shut down. As soon as the application closes, we go through that period of the eligibility scan and all of that stuff I mentioned earlier. And this is what we call the discipline reader reading period. And that happens from mid-September to mid to late October. Once we get those ratings back and have selected the top 25 to 35 that are moving on, notification of advancement is going out to everyone via email. So you'll find out if you're in that group or not. Next, they move on, those top rated applicants will move on to the citizen review panelists, and they have a reading period from October to November, so late October to late November. They will have a meeting the 3rd week in November where they will discuss their ratings and discuss the type of cohort that they're trying to build, and will select the top 10. Those 10 are going to go onto the grants committee. The grants committee does have their own meeting where they ask us any questions that they have and then approve moving those selected onto the full commission. And then the full commission is going to vote on the awards on Thursday, December 12th. And we will send out notifications on Friday, December 13th to those 25 to 35 people, letting them know if they were selected or not. Once that happens, we prepare some paperwork, we get some information from you if you're selected as an Artist Fellow, and prepare to celebrate you in January. So the Artist Fellowship year starts January 1st, Tuesday, January 1st of 2020. We will be publicly announcing with a press release, and then we typically have a reception to welcome the Artist Fellows, and that happens typically mid to late January of 2020, or mid to late January each year. So I mentioned that there was an application tutorial. I just wanted to tell you how to get there. So you would go to our website again. Excuse me. So go to our website, click on Explore Grants, Available Grants, Artist Fellowship, and then on this page you'll see some tabs that'll say criteria, schedule, eligibility, etc. And one of them says how to apply. It's on the very end on the right. You want to click on how to apply, and if you scroll down past the workshops, you will see a link to the Artist Grants Guide that I mentioned earlier, but you'll also see a link to the individual artist applications walkthrough. And this is going to walk you through all of the technical aspects of the application. We're going to spend the next 2 slides on that. So if you have already created your account, you won't have to worry about this part, but if you have not, you'll click on sign up on the website, you'll create an account, it will send you an email. You absolutely have to respond to that email before you're going to be able to log in. But once you log in, the first thing you're going to do is go to your applicant setup. So you'll see on the top of your homepage your tasks, applicant setup, and it'll say it's incomplete. Go ahead and start that. Applicant setup is going to ask you if you are an organization or an artist or both. If you are an artist who also works with one of our grantee organization or an organization that you think may apply with us, and you are the person who handles fundraising for that organization, you will want to select both. But otherwise, you're typically going to select artist. And then this is a pretty important note. So once you've created application setup, or once you've completed the applicant setup, you'll scroll down and you'll see your grant applications. If you have never applied before, this area will be blank and it'll say no grant applications. That doesn't mean that you're not eligible, it just means you haven't started one. So you'll click on the View Grant Applications button and that will get you started. If you have applied in the past, using this system, this is a little bit confusing. When you log in, you will see your previous application. What you want to do is look to the right and it should say previous year's application. But do note that the deadline will be the same as the current grant. It's a part of the way the system works. You still need to go to View Grant Applications to create your application. Okay, and then I mentioned this before, but our Artist Support Grant is open right now. The deadline is today, so if you haven't started it, it may be quite a feat. But if you went through this process and felt like the Artist Fellowship doesn't really seem like where you're trying to go or what you're trying to do, consider the Artist Support Grant. Especially if you have like a very specific thing in mind, and that's really what it's about. It's less about the entirety of your career and you're really just trying to get this next thing done. You could try to get an application in today. If not, this is opening again on January 27th. So we run the Artist Support Grants every 6 months or so. So that's something to consider as well. Finally, I have 2 more slides for you and then we'll get to general questions. This is a resource that's available to all of you right now, whether or not you're a grantee. You can add your arts and culture events to our website. So you'll go to our website, in the top right-hand corner, you'll see Event Contributor Login. Click on that and it will allow you to register to become an event contributor. Once you do that, any workshops, any openings, any concerts, etc., that you'd like the public to attend, you can add to our website. It'll show up on our culture calendar, and on the day of the event, it typically rolls on to the homepage of the website. So it's some pretty great promotional opportunity. It is free, but your events do not have to be. So you are able to add any ticketed or priced events that you have to this as well. And then finally, here are a couple of local resources that I just want to make sure you all know about. They are Volunteer Lawyers and Accountants for the Arts. VLAA is a really fantastic organization that does a lot of connecting artists to information about legal issues that affect artists, as well as tax and accounting issues that affect artists, as well as arts organizations. You can also work directly with a volunteer lawyer or accountant on like your taxes, on like creating strong contracts, etc. And VLAA often has workshops about it too. Like they have an accidental arts administrator workshop that talks about all of the things that you need to be a successful entrepreneur, as many artists are. And then there's MAPS, which is Midwest Artist Project Services. So MAPS does a couple of things all in the area of artist support. The first is that they have this thing called fiscal sponsorship. So if people are working on bigger projects or collaborating on larger projects, fiscal sponsorship is when an organization says to funders, I will help this artist and I will manage some of the funds for this artist, so that individual artists and collaboratives can apply for funding that typically only a nonprofit would be able to. And then the second thing that they do is grant review, which is pretty timely right now. They, I think it's between 5 and 15, I'm not sure, but they actually have folks who have a lot of experience with grants who will actually look at your application prior to you submitting it. If you have any questions about the criteria, about our policies, about whether or not you're eligible, definitely come and talk to me. It's free. But if what you want is someone to really like look at your application and give you feedback on the quality of your application, they are one of the organizations that I know that does this. And with that, are there any more questions?